The first thing I remember about him is the way he squinted against the morning fog, as if trying to see through it to see me. The ferry had just arrived from St. Malo, carrying boxes of butter, sugar, and one stubborn man with dreams packed inside his pastry case. He told me his name was Pei Chuan, though the locals at the harbor called him the Paris boy. His accent bent the French vowels in strange, charming ways. I was cleaning the Lighthouse lens when he asked if I ever got lonely up there. "Only when the sea forgets to speak," I said. He laughed, a sound soft enough to mix with the gulls. He said he was opening a pastry workshop on Rue des Étoiles Street of Stars. I thought it was an omen, that our names would somehow belong to the same map. He visited the lighthouse often after that. Sometimes he brought warm croissants, still glistening with butter, sometimes only silence. He said he liked how the light swept across the sea every 12 seconds. It reminded him of rhythm, of timing, of sugar melting just before it burns. I didn't tell him that I timed my heartbeats with that same light. Every 12 seconds, a pulse, his laughter, his voice, his shadow climbing the spiral stairs. One evening, as he packed to return to Paris for a competition, he left behind a small glass jar on the windowsill. Inside it, sugar dust and a folded recipe card. "Keep this for me," he said, "until I earn my stars." I nodded, pretending not to notice that the sea had gone silent again. The next morning, I watched his ferry fade into the fog. I lit the lamp early that day, not for ships, but for him. Paris had a way of swallowing people whole, he used to say that, half in awe, half in fear. When his first letter arrived, the envelope smelled faintly of vanilla and train smoke. He wrote that the city never slept, that sugar here obeyed no rules, and that his mentor, Elise Marquand, was everything he'd ever admired about the art of pastry: precise, untouchable, celestial. I read his letter 3 times, tracing the loops of his handwriting as if they could lead me back to him. At night I updated my astronomy blog, writing about Orion rising over the lighthouse glass, about the way constellations looked lonelier when seen from land instead of sea. He called me once from a payphone, breathless, laughing. "I burned the caramel," he said. "Elise said it's because I think too much." His laughter warmed the receiver, but I heard another voice in the background, hers. Light and effortless, the way Parisians say mon cher without meaning it. After that, his visits grew fewer. He still sent jars of jam and postcards with sketches of Rue des Étoiles, the bakery sign, the lamplight, the stars that hung above the rooftops. But every photo had someone else in it now. In early autumn, a package arrived. Inside, a cake wrapped in gold foil, and a note that said, "For the one who keeps the light, don't wait too long to taste sweetness." The cake was perfect layers of hazelnut and citrus, and yet, it tasted like goodbye. That night, I stood beneath the rotating beam, realizing something cruel and simple. You can light a path for someone, but you can't make them turn around. When I finally visited Paris, it was colder than I imagined. The air tasted like powdered sugar and smoke, and the Seine carried reflections of people who no longer belonged to me. I found the bakery on Rue des Étoiles. Its windows glowed amber against the gray street, the smell of butter wrapping around me like a memory I shouldn't touch. He was there behind the counter, white apron dusted with flour, laughter spilling from his mouth as if he'd never known silence. Next to him stood Elise Marquand, her hair tied neatly, her hands shaping dough as if sculpting constellations. When he saw me, surprise flashed across his face, quickly softened into warmth. "You came?" He wiped his hands and hugged me, and in that instant I realized something devastating. His heartbeat didn't quicken against mine anymore. Elise smiled, polite and poised. "I've heard much about you," she said in French. "The keeper of his light." Her words were gentle, but they struck with precision. We had dinner together that night, the 3 of us. They talked about texture, about sugar temperature, about timing in the oven. I watched him come alive beside her, his voice brighter, gestures freer. When we parted, he pressed a small box into my hand, macarons, the color of dawn. "For the trip back," he said. "So you'll think of sweetness when you see the sea." I smiled, but I didn't tell him that sweetness fades faster than light. That night, in my rented room, I opened the box. Each cookie was perfect, uniform, soulless. They all tasted like her orbit, a gravity he could no longer escape. The night of the eclipse, the lighthouse went silent. No gulls, no waves, just the sound of the lamp rotating above me, cutting the dark into measured slices. He was supposed to call. He promised, "I'll phone you after the competition, before the results." So I waited, the phone beside the lantern table, the sea murmuring like an impatient friend, but the call never came. Instead, the radio crackled with Parisian news. Chef Elise Marquinte and her protégé Pei Xingxuan win the Silver Star Pastry Award for their creation Eclipse de Vanille. I froze. The name hit me like a wave against stone. Eclipse. A dessert named after the one night he was meant to call. I climbed the spiral stairs to the lantern room. The beam turned slowly, 12 seconds of light, 12 seconds of dark. Through the telescope, I could see the moon, half-shadowed, slipping behind Earth's edge. For a heartbeat, I imagined him there, under the same eclipse, lifting a trophy beside her. I wanted to be proud. I wanted to whisper congratulations. But my throat was salt, and the word never left me. At midnight, I placed his jar, the one filled with sugar dust, on the windowsill. The sugar had clumped from the damp sea air, crystallized into something harder, something that would never dissolve again. I finally understood why the sea keeps its distance from the shore. It loves too loudly, and always ends up breaking something. He came back without warning. The last time I saw him, Paris was between us like a long, glass river. This time, it was just rain. When I opened the lighthouse door, he stood there soaked to the bone, a paper box in his hands. "I didn't call," he said, voice rough. "I thought I'd just come." The box held a cake, his new creation, normande and orange, glazed with something amber and fragile. He said it was called Larmes du Sel, tears of salt. A cruel name, I thought. He didn't realize how close he was to irony. We shared it in silence, 2 spoons between us. It tasted like memory, sweet, then bitter, then gone. "Elise says I overthink flavor," he said, forcing a laugh. "But I wanted to make something that tasted like home," I asked. "And which one is that now?" He didn't answer. The wind howled through the cracks, the sea beating against the rocks. Then, quietly, he said, "I missed this place. I missed you." For a second, I almost believed him. Until I noticed his phone vibrating, her name flashing on the screen. I stood up, the chair scraping the floor. "You should answer." He didn't. Instead, he reached for my hand, but the moment had already burned, like sugar past its point of beauty, and all that was left was smoke. "I can't be your waiting room, Xingchuan," I whispered. "I keep the light for ships, not for ghosts." He left before dawn, the cake half eaten, the smell of caramel still clinging to the air. I watched from the balcony as his car disappeared down the wet road. That night, the sea was louder than ever, as if trying to drown out the sound of something breaking inside me. Days passed like tides coming and going, soft and inevitable. He didn't call again. Not once. The silence was almost kind, in its own cruel way. I began collecting things the sea returned. Bits of driftwood, smooth stones, shells the color of moonlight, and then, one morning, I found a piece of glass sea-worn, pale green edges dulled by time. It looked like something that used to hurt. I started keeping them in jars by the window. The glass pieces caught the lighthouse beam at night, scattering tiny constellations across the walls. It was strange how beauty could come from what had been shattered. In the evenings, I made tea and updated my blog. I wrote about reflection and refraction, about how light bends when it passes through something broken. A reader left a comment. Maybe that's why broken hearts see the world differently. One afternoon, a letter arrived from Paris. Not from him, but from Elise Marquinte. She thanked me politely for inspiring their award-winning dessert, and invited me to visit their new shop in the Mary. At the bottom, a postscript. "He speaks of you often. You are a kind memory to him." A kind memory. I read it twice, then placed it under the jar of sea glass. Outside, the waves shimmered silver in the fading light. Maybe that's all I was ever meant to be. Not the harbor he returns to, but the reflection he remembers when the tide is calm. They say Paris is most beautiful before dawn. But beauty, I think, depends on who's watching. He told me later that the fight began over nothing. A missing recipe note. A late delivery. But it was never about sugar or almonds. It was about her voice rising like glass shattering, and his silence that followed like smoke. Elise had accused him of distraction, of mixing sentiment with craft. He said he was tired of being perfect for her camera. For the first time, his hands trembled not from work, but from words unsaid. He walked out of the kitchen, apron still tied, the scent of burnt vanilla clinging to him like guilt. Outside, Étoiles was quiet, its street lamps flickering like old stars ready to die. He thought of calling me. He even typed the message, "Are you awake?" Then deleted it. Instead, he wandered the city until dawn. At the bridge over the Seine, he saw a reflection in the water. Not Elise, not me, just himself, small and lost. For the first time, he realized that light can blind as much as it can guide. He had been chasing brilliance, while the gentler glow, the one that waited, forgave, and stayed, was the very thing he'd left behind. He didn't know that at that same moment, hundreds of kilometers away, I was standing in my lighthouse, turning off the lamp for maintenance, watching darkness fall and feeling, inexplicably, at peace. I began writing again. Not for the blog, not for readers, just for myself. I called it the Lighthouse Diary. Every entry began the same way. Today, the sea was different, sometimes calm, sometimes furious, sometimes so still it made me uneasy. Because silence, I've learned, is rarely peace. I wrote about the days when fog erased the horizon, when I couldn't tell where the ocean ended or I began. I wrote about the scent of burnt sugar that still lingered in the hall, and how memory, like tide, returns no matter how often you sweep the shore. And slowly, my words turned softer. Less about him, more about light. About keeping it steady even when no ship was near. One night I posted a passage online by accident. Love is not a lighthouse waiting for someone to return. It's the act of keeping light, even when no one is looking. It spread farther than I expected. Among the comments was one that stopped me cold. I think I knew that light once. The username was unfamiliar, but the phrasing, the way he used words, I knew. Across the distance between sea and city, he had found my words, and for the first time, he didn't respond with sugar or apology, but silence, the kind that means understanding. Outside, the lighthouse turned, 12 seconds of light, 12 seconds of dark. And for once, both felt like home. I heard the ferry horn before I saw him. It was late afternoon, the kind of light that turns gold just before fading. I was mending a broken lantern when the footsteps came up the spiral stairs. Slow, hesitant, familiar. He said my name like a confession. He looked thinner, paler, his eyes rimmed with exhaustion and something else, truth, maybe. In his hands, a small tin box, rusted at the corners. I don't know what I thought I'd find here, he said softly. But every time I closed my eyes in Paris, I saw this place. The beam, your face behind it. I didn't answer. The air between us smelled of salt and rain, and the faint ghost of burnt sugar. He opened the tin box. Inside were fragments of sea glass mean. I've been collecting them too, he said, his voice breaking. I thought maybe if I held what you held, I could understand what you meant about light, about keeping it. Tears stung my eyes, not from love, but from the tenderness of too late understanding. I was wrong, he whispered. About everything? Elise, she was the dream. But you were the morning after. The part that stays. For a moment, the lighthouse light swept across his face, soft and forgiving. He reached for my hand, and this time, I didn't pull away. But I didn't move closer either. You found the light, I said. That's enough. He looked at me like a man realizing he'd been chasing the horizon, never knowing it was always moving. When he left, he turned once at the doorway, as the beam crossed between us. Will you ever forgive me? He asked. I smiled faintly. I already did. That's why you could find your way back. The tide was high that night, washing over old footprints on the sand. By morning, the shore looked untouched, like it had forgiven, too. Autumn came early that year. The The wind carried salt and endings, the kind that didn't hurt anymore, just reminded you of what used to matter. He wrote once more before leaving France. A short letter, no return address. It said, "You were right. Light doesn't wait, it continues. I'm opening a small bakery by the coast in Cornwall. There's a lighthouse nearby. Sometimes, when it turns, I imagine it's you." I folded the letter carefully, placed it inside the tin box he had left behind, now resting beside the sea glass. For a moment, I let myself smile, not out of longing, but peace. The lighthouse still needed tending. The ships still came and went. And I had finally learned love isn't the waiting, it's the keeping. Every night, I climbed the stairs and lit the lamp. The beam stretched across the dark water. Not searching, not pleading, just being. Sometimes, I saw couples walking along the shore below. Their shadows intertwined, their laughter drifting upward like prayer. I didn't envy them, because I had my own kind of love, quiet, constant, undemanding, the kind that stayed, even after the tide had taken everything else away. When the wind blew in from the west, I thought I could almost smell almonds and burnt sugar again. It didn't ache anymore. It only reminded me that once, someone found his way home by my light, and that was enough. The seaside below, the lantern hummed softly above, and the night, at last, was kind.